Good evening. Tonight we have a special guest, Helen Modora, an international student from Kenya. Helen is a graduate student at San Francisco State University, majoring in women's studies. She is currently working on her thesis regarding disability children and disability kids, which she hopes could be used when she goes back to Kenya. So Helen, welcome.
Thank you.
And you look gorgeous.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of things that I would like to ask you about Kenya. There's a lot of things that people in America are wondering about Kenya. Of course, the potential nominee for the U.S. presidency, Mr. Barack Obama, Senator Barack Obama, his family on his father's side is from Kenya. So it's what a coincidence that we have somebody special like you to kind of show the world, show America as to the sophistication and the perseverance that most Kenyan people have in terms of education, in terms of pursuing higher education and being part of a developing nation and so forth. So tell me, when people think about Kenya from a Kenyan standpoint, what do you think people, how does the world perceive Kenya?
Well, before I answer that, I must say we are so excited about Barack Obama throwing himself in the ring and wanting to run for the highest office in the United States. It's really a privilege for Kenyans, and we really hope he can win. I understand the dilemma that America is in at this moment. You know, you have a woman for the first time.
Exactly.
And you have the race issues going on. So either way, I think it's a privilege for us to see Barack having come this far and throwing himself out there. And we really hope if Kenyans were allowed to vote him, of course we would put him in office. But let's see how the Americans decide. What I'm doing right now, coincidentally, is probably what Barack Obama's father did many years ago, coming to the United States to look for an education. There are thousands and thousands of Kenyans, you know, looking for the opportunity to come to different countries, not necessarily in the United States, but yes, the United States a lot of times. And, you know, getting an international education puts you at a different level. You start understanding things from a different perspective. You, in the United States in particular, because of the multicultural element, you are able to understand so many issues. It's like, you know, this boiling pot where all cultures are here. So you get to know about almost everyone being here. And so I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to do that, thanks to Ford Foundation.
Yeah, tell me, the Ford Foundation, you're talking about the car company, right? Ford Foundation.
They have a foundation. I know that they have one arm which supports students specifically from America, but they do also have another arm of the foundation that supports international students from all over the world. So you have people from India, from China, from South America, from Africa, you know, all over. We have a very large pool of experts who are being supported to further their education by Ford Foundation. Otherwise, you can imagine it's so expensive to travel, to come here, and to even pay the school fees. It's not possible unless you get such funding. So I'm one of the Ford Fellows for 2006, and I'm excited that I could get the opportunity to do that. And usually, it's a lot about your academic background, yes, because you need high scores, even to, you know, competitive high scores to get into the university. But at the same time, they focus on social justice, you know, like people who are involved in transforming other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And I have been involved in human rights issues. I do a lot of work with abused and neglected children. And I also have done a lot of work with children with disabilities in particular. And so I'm glad that I came to women's studies and found a very appropriate space for me to interrogate all forms of oppression, not necessarily just about women, but every other group of people who are oppressed. And that's why I can do my thesis on children with disabilities, looking at the wider oppression that people with disabilities experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then coming to your question about Kenya, a lot of times when somebody from very far thinks about Kenya, the first thing they think of is the safaris.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have the great safaris. We have, wonderful wildlife. We have the birds. There's one like Nakuru, which is very popular with flamingos,
Right.
So it's a very spectacular view that people come to do. And it's more than that. And then we also have the long distance runners.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
we are always winners of Boston Marathon.
Now tell me,
whatever
why do they
marathon.
always win the marathon?
I guess it's a lot of practice and a lot of resilience, because a lot of those people who win it, you can see that if you see the number of hours they have to put in, having to run on a daily basis.
But is that part of their lives that they have to run through the hills and so forth, and that's why they're used to
One
it?
community that is very good at it comes from a terrain where it's rugged and hilly, and so they have to do that long distance. So naturally, when they come to a place where it's flat, or a place where they, so they build up that stamina to do it, and to persevere. And I'm always amazed at the patience they have, running like for 5, 6, 7 hours nonstop, and coming out as the winner to do that.
Well, tell me, you're a very impressive woman. The first time I met you, and you have a woman who has been well known for environmental issues. She is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and part of her platform was planting trees, bringing back the ecology. Could you talk about her?
Yes, you're talking about Professor Wangari Maathai.
Okay.
She's the Nobel Peace Prize laureate for 2004. And for the first time, I think the committee went against the norm. The norm being like they nominate somebody in science, in literature, in, all these other things. But she's the first person, I believe, who was nominated for her efforts in sustainable development, and in particular because of her effort in the environment. She has a wonderful movement known as the Green Belt Movement, which focuses on the ecology and planting trees, because basically all these wars you have is always wars about resources. And if there's one resource that people are going to fight for in future, it's water. And if you don't have trees, then you don't get rain. Then you get the desert, spreading out, like we have the Sahara Desert in Africa.
Right.
And her efforts are really geared towards stopping the Sahara Desert from encroaching much of Africa. So right now, I'm aware she has this a global campaign called the Billion Tree Campaign, and she asks everyone to take part. You have your footprints. How many times do you take a flight, domestic or international, and what does that mean to the environment? And so is it possible for you to think about planting a tree so that, let's say, given in a period of 5 to 10 years, we have like, if every one of us planted one tree, the whole world, what's that going to mean? So I'm glad that that's her effort, but it's the environment, but the wider thing is promoting peace. Because when you start fighting for resources, because they are scarce, then you don't have peace. So the wider goal is actually to achieve peace, and
Exactly.
it was a very interesting connection that the Nobel Committee could see that.
Exactly.
And we were really honored that it was a Kenyan who was honored to, and she's the first woman, I believe, in Africa. I'm not sure about the whole world, but she could be pretty much among the very few women who've been ever honored to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
Kenya is a patriarchal society, right? So is she one of the pioneers, or one of the women who broke frontiers for women such as you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, she has a very wonderful memoir which came out, I believe, a year ago. It's called Unbowed. And incidentally, she did what I'm doing right now in the 60s. President J.F. Kennedy had something called airlifts, like they would go to Africa, or they had a program where they would bring up people from Africa and other developing countries to come to the United States to study and to enhance their knowledge on issues. Then they take back the knowledge and use it in their communities. So she studied in the United States in the 60s. and went on to become a professor, and she was teaching in one of the public universities in Kenya. So she was a pioneer in that sense, and she's very strong. She always stands for the truth. It doesn't matter whether, you know, you can see a lot of times, you know, when you stand for the truth, your life is in danger.
Exactly.
But she's always managed to move on and do it regardless of the odds that surround her. So she doesn't back down at all.
Now, you call yourself a feminist. Could you sort of tell us about what, for a Kenyan woman, what does feminism means?
You know, like feminism has been misinterpreted in many societies.
Right.
And I think, like, particularly in the Kenyan society, if you say you're a feminist, a lot of times it looks like these women who are independent and uncontrollable, you know, under the patriarchal structure. But I don't look at it that way. I look at feminism as a movement that advocates for the equality of sexes. We have equal rights regardless of our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our ability, or what we define as disability. And so I advocate for that equality, not necessarily from a gender perspective, but right now my constituency is people with disabilities, and I'm able to interrogate disability under feminism. You know, the same oppression that women face is the same oppression that people with disabilities face. And so I look at it in that broad sense.
Now, Kenya is one of the few countries where you still have the norm of the genital mutilation.
Some communities do. And you know, like you're talking about patriarchy.
Yes.
I guess the whole world is so patriarchal, including the United States.
Of course, yes.
It's taken, you know, the United States has been, you know, for 500 years, and still you've never had a woman president.
Yes.
And you have other countries which may not necessarily look like they are democratic in that sense, but there are other smaller countries that have had women as presidents or as prime ministers. And so this patriarchal thing, in the Kenyan context, it's oppressive because we are an agrarian society. And, you know, in agriculture, it's the oldest patriarch
Exactly.
who calls the shots, as it were. And so you have women and children under the patriarch. And women, for example, in an agricultural economy, land is a very important resource. But you find that people inherit it. Usually it's the boys who inherit land from their fathers. So women cannot access land, you know, through inheritance. A lot of times it's you're expected to get married and then access your land through your husband or your brothers or your father. So
that's still going on? Do you still have, do you have betrothals? That's sort of...
No, we don't. What I mean is, even in the new, even with industrialization, therefore it means that it's the men who are privileged to go out and look for a job. Yeah. It's the men who are more privileged to go to school. And we have an imbalance in terms of literacy. You'll find like the male literacy level would be like 90%, and then you find the women would be about 70 or 75, 79%. It keeps shuttling between there. So those differences stem out from this.
Meeting somebody like you wouldn't think that would be the case, huh?
You wouldn't think so? Well, in terms of people who can, you know, the worst thing about illiteracy is like there is no universal definition. If you look at people who can read and write in Kenya, over 85% can do that. But then if you have to define it in terms of how that education enables you to develop as an individual, to have a source of income, then you'll find the men are more privileged, you know, like the big bosses or the big shots of corporate companies, or, you know, you have a few women getting in right now.
Right.
But a lot of it is male dominated. Now,
Kenya plays a strategic role geographically in Africa, right? Because of your coastal region. Mm-hmm. So you have like landlocked African countries, and they have to be friendly and nice to Kenya to access, to gain access to their territory. So how does that coastal strategic position help Kenya in terms of its balance of power with the other African American countries?
Kenya
not African American, other African countries, sorry.
Okay, Kenya has been the focus of the world because a lot of times it's seen as a model, you know, as a of a country that is always striving to do what other countries don't.
Right.
You know, like in Africa, we have a lot of instability.
Exactly.
And Kenya has been the hub of peace for a long time, of course, until the last elections.
Yeah, tell me about it. Well, you had, what, 1,200 people got killed, and
yeah,
a lot of people became homeless as a result. About 300,000 people had to do some internal migration or transference from one tribe to another.
Yeah, but before I come into that, you know, your point about being a very strategic position. So you have a lot of goods coming through the Kenyan port to be transported to our neighboring countries like Uganda, like Rwanda, like the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so all of them depend on Kenya. And so if there's no stability in Kenya, and if goods cannot go across Kenya, then there's that ripple effect with the other countries. And so that's why when we had the recent violence, you could see the whole international world stood with Kenya and said, no, we're not going to let Kenya crumble. And that was a wake-up call for us, like you realize how important you are, because a lot of goods could not go through. Every other country was starting to experience, some form of inflation because of what was happening in Kenya. And then you have international agencies then coming to your question about the violence, Kenya is a young democracy. And like with all young democracies, you have governance issues.
The president cheated the election.
Yeah, well, we have reports saying that, like we had like the European Union and other independent observers. It's for them to say what happened. But people felt like it was highly flawed, and so the violence started on that note. But there were other historical issues that somebody in America may not understand. First of all, in 1896, you have people sitting in Germany to divide Africa as a colony. And so you have someone saying, I'll take West Africa, the French did, the British took a lot of East Africa, and many others. And they divide these sections among communities who never coexisted in the first place. And you're forced to call yourself as one nation and one country. And so for the last 40 years we've had independence, there's been a lot of, you have to kind of internalize that kind of patriotism. Mm-hmm. So we realized with the recent violence, is like it was an issue that was never addressed, because at that time the common enemy was the colonizer. And once he left, we thought we are one people. But we realize now we had those rifts which we never addressed. And then you have the whole colonial thing going on, and the media does not show that, I'd rather the media would bring out all those historical things that have brought Kenya to that brink,
Give a historical perspective.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to be stabilizing now, right, the political situation. So former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan has pretty much brokered some kind of peace deal, more of like a political power brokering between the two competing presidential candidates, right?
Yeah.
So one was going to be the president and the other one is going to be the prime minister.
Yeah. Everybody realized, like, if we keep on pressing for justice and saying, no, we want justice, the justice was coming with a cost of so many lives.
Exactly.
So the easier thing to do was to take a political stand and say, okay, if this is going to balance out the power, because over the years also we've had the whole issue about power and resources. Like, when I take over, I want all my clan members are the ones who will, benefit at the expense of others. And so those are the realities, like, the current leaders have to face, that you have to treat all Kenyans equally and share out the resources equally, and not just based on your ethnicity. That leadership is just wider than serving your own ethnic community.
How many people do you have in Kenya? I forgot to ask. I should have asked the question.
Kenya has a population of 34 million people.
34 million.
34 million.
And how big is the country?
The country is like 222,000 square miles.
Okay.
Or 580,000 kilometers squared.
Okay.
And we have, like, it's very diverse in terms of culture. We have like 8 major languages, and
42 tribes, right?
42 subcultures and sub languages. So it's
so the tribes, right, are with the tribes you had former chiefs in those tribes, or
small kingdoms. Yeah, we had small kingdoms within these tribes.
So the fact that it became a country in itself is quite a major feat.
Yeah, so people had to, the kingship system had to go for all these small communities, and then now we took on the British way of parliament, you know.
Right.
So we work with the British system of governance, a parliament, and then the president is usually the head of state and is also the head of government. And so, you know, those are some of the issues, you know, like he's seen to be very powerful. That kind of structure, you know, invests a lot of power in one person, and power corrupts people. So if you can call all the shots, if you don't have any checks and balances, so those are the things that, you know, after the peace deal was reached at, we are going to still have a long political process to square out some of those things, you know, in terms of governance. How best do we make our leaders accountable? How do we share out power in a way that it does not give one a lot of influence and a lot of authority to oppress or exploit or manipulate the system or the legal system, so that you can do what you want. So
exactly,
just basically making the leaders more accountable.
So how many women are there in the parliament now? How many parliamentarians are there?
Well, I go back to the patriarchal thing that we spoke about a few minutes ago, and it will be interesting to note, like the Nobel Peace Prize winner Wangari Maathai. She was in the last parliament.
Oh, okay.
She was in the last parliament.
And they voted in constituencies. Did you say? Are they like states or something?
We represent. Yeah, we have what we call constituencies, and in Kenya we have like 210 of them. And out of that, you'll find the women would hardly be 18. You wouldn't have even 18 women elected to be in parliament out of 200.
Wow.
And I wanted to say, like, the patriarchal structure that we have, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, even after the world could recognize her efforts, she still was made an assistant minister of the environment. You're talking about the Nobel Peace Prize winner, for heaven's sake. So you see, the attitude is like, it's still like, we're not sure about women. I don't think women can lead us. You know, women who get into politics, I admire them, because you must have a thick skin. You must have a backing of financial resources like every other place in the world. And women often start from a lower position in terms of resources, like I've mentioned. So many women don't get into politics in the first place. And if they do, there's so many odds against them. So you have only 18.
Guys play dirty, right?
They play dirty. And it's really dirty in terms of violence, not necessarily just dirty talk and everything. Sometimes it's violence.
With all the killings, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And I just wanted to compare. I just wanted to compare Kenya with like Uganda and Tanzania. In Uganda, you have about 75 women in parliament. In Tanzania, you have about 61 women in parliament. So it's really sad that Kenya is supposed to be a model, but when you come to electoral politics, we are not.
My God, so you're so Western yourself. I mean, what will you take back to Kenya that you don't already know?
There's a lot of information that I've had. There's a lot of knowledge. Stepping out of the country helps you to look at it critically. You know, like when you're an insider, you're engrossed in what is happening. You don't realize. But when you step out, then you're able to look at it from a different perspective, and that's what I can do now.
Great. Well, we're running out of time, and there's so much to learn about Kenya. There's so much to learn about you.
There is.
I mean, in just this discussion alone, I learned a whole lot. Well, thank you for being here, and
thank you,
Helen. I really appreciate you coming, and we will continue talking. So you're supposed to be graduating on June,
on the end of May.
The end of May. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. And I really hope I could take back, I really hope to start a project that focuses on policies, changing policies, because, I mean, if you don't have the foundational policy supporting what you're doing, then it's a big problem. So
great. I'm sure you'll do well.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A proud woman.
Thank you.